So thanks for telling me. Hi, I'm Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating the meeting tonight. Welcome, everybody. We will get you out of here, I promise, at 7 o'clock. Most important thing, right? This meeting tonight is being held to discuss the feasibility study related to the former Ford Aeronutronics facility, where I think everybody knows about that project, for Sea Island and Belcourt Hill communities. We're going to be talking about the draft feasibility study. The draft feasibility study are the various options that were looked at to address volatile organic compounds in soil gas and indoor air. So we'll be talking about that. Most importantly tonight, we're in the middle of a public comment period, and I wanted to make sure that you folks know we're really here to hear your comments on what you hear, what you hear tonight, what you think about what we're proposing, and how you'd like us to move forward, and also what we can do to improve our communications. So really quickly, when you came in, you probably signed in. That's really just to track if we have a COVID case so that we can comply with regulations. And then you've got a series of handouts. If you didn't get handouts, please raise your hand. I'll be glad to get them to you. Okay, I don't think so. Okay, we have a short presentation. I don't think anybody can see this, so I don't know how good are your eyes, because mine aren't very good these days. So it is important that you have the handout here to follow along. And then with me tonight is Jessica Law, who is the project manager with the Water Board, and she's been leading this project for how long? 5 years now? I think so. 5 years, yeah, long time. That's actually fast by the state of California's timeline. And then also Daniela, and I'm not going to do your last name, never can do it right, but Daniela is the new project manager on this. She's an engineer, and she's been running this. And then also Heidi is here as well, and Heidi is working with Daniela. So that's our panel tonight. We have a short presentation. You can interrupt us at any time with questions. I would like to make sure that everybody hears the question. So if you have a question, I'd ask you to raise your hand. I'd like to hand you the microphone so that you can articulate it so everybody here can hear you. I know everybody thinks that they can be heard, but really it's not so easy. So if you would comply with me on that, I'd appreciate it. And then the last thing I wanted to say is this is being live streamed, which means that you can go to YouTube if you have nothing better to do and watch this, or if you want to see yourself on the TV. So that's why it is important, again, to make sure that we hear your question for anybody that might go and watch this at a later date. We have lots of handouts here. I'm not going to go through them all. There's various ones that we give out at every meeting, an acronym list, where to get more information, the fact sheet that was sent out, the public comment period dates are in there, and then also the presentation. So I think that is all I have. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
I didn't? Okay, that's unusual, so yay. Any questions for me? No? Okay, then I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, and she's going to take us through the presentation. I think it's about 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's pretty brief, and what I'll do is with each slide, I'll let you know what number I'm on. So right now I'm on slide number 4.
I don't know if your microphone's working that well.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
All right, great.
So tonight's presentation is just going over the...
Little closer. You really have to get up in it.
Is this better?
Yes, it is.
There we go. All right. So tonight's presentation is about the draft feasibility study. And I'm not going to provide much recap on the historical side. We're really jumping in kind of to the deep end. So it is a lot of technical information. If I lose you, raise your hand, interrupt me. It's a small group. We can have conversation. I'm hoping throughout the presentation I'm able to answer most of those questions, but feel free to interrupt if I've lost you somewhere. So we're going to give a quick little recap. Then we're going to go over the remediation process, followed by the remedial action objectives, which are essentially the cleanup goals for this project. Then we'll talk about the feasibility study itself and what the recommended remedial alternatives are. And then we will go over what the public comment period entails, and then end with what the next steps are, and then we'll start that Q&A session. So on slide 5, make sure I'm there, just to do a quick recap. So the vapor intrusion assessment activities that have been ongoing for the last probably 4 years now, that's collected a sufficient amount of data. That data that's been collected from your community is what was put into those human health risk assessment reports for both the Sea Island community and the Belcourt Hill community. And the conclusion was that there was vapor intrusion occurring at one home, not consistently, but it was right at that lower end of our risk management level. And then there was also the potential for future vapor intrusion risk. And so from that, the Santa Ana Water Board, we requested 2 reports from Ford. One, we wanted to have a feasibility study prepared to look at is remediation of the soil vapor plume here feasible? And then the other one was an indoor air monitoring plan. I think some of you have received notification on that indoor air, the longer term indoor air monitoring plan. So those are the 2 reports that came from it. So Wood, on behalf of Ford, submitted that the draft feasibility study on November 17th last year, and then we just provided comments in May 19th. So the next slide is the remediation process. And this is, it's important to just kind of take a moment to discuss this so that you are all aware of the steps that it takes to get into remediation. So we have to start with that site investigation. We need to know the extent of the contamination below the ground. They do all the field investigations, and then from all of that site-specific data that's been collected, that's when they prepare those risk assessment reports. From that, we requested that feasibility study, and that is just developing and evaluating the cleanup alternatives. And it also includes recommending an alternative. Then we're where we are at now, which is the public comment period. We're proposing the proposed remedy, or announcing the proposed remedy, and then providing an opportunity for public input. We want to hear from you. And then from there would be remedial design, and that is to design the remedy and the kind of any community protection measures, and then secure any necessary permits from the city, the county, and any other regulatory agencies or oversight agencies. And then finally is the remedy implementation phase, and that is the safe implementation of the remedy, as well as maintaining and monitoring that remedy. So we'll go to that next slide. So we're at the draft feasibility study, and it covers these following items. I'm going to go into more detail in the coming slides, but the draft feasibility study, it proposes the specific remedial action objectives. So what are the cleanup goals for the site? It conducts a feasibility study to evaluate the different remedial technologies that they can use. Then they identify and evaluate the remedial alternatives. And a remedial alternative is one or more remedial technologies that is recommended based on that feasibility study. And then it's proposing a remedial alternative for water board approval and for public review and comment. And finally, for this site here, for this area, this feasibility study only addresses soil gas contamination, that soil vapor plume. There is impacted groundwater, but it's that shallow groundwater. It's not your drinking water. And so we know that it's going to be at least a year, but probably 2 years before we get to the point of being able to prepare a feasibility study for that. And so we wanted to move forward with looking at cleanup options for the soil vapor plume that's in this area. Yeah. For the groundwater?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, do we know where the groundwater contamination is, like where it starts and stuff? And from there, it's kind of at the, the numbers. Okay. So the highest concentration off the top of my head, I think it was about 2 orders of magnitude over what is the drinking water standards. It's shallow groundwater, so it's not what you would drink, but it's high enough that we want to address it. I think the highest concentration was 1,000, and the MCL is 5 for the particular contaminant called trichloroethene, or TCE. And
The reason I'm asking is I tested myself for toxic compounds. My TCE is very high.
interesting, because that comes from the city. No, so the water that comes from your tap comes from the city. Well, shallow groundwater, yeah, that has it, but that's not the drinking water. Drinking water is piped in from your city. Okay. I guess I'm missing.
I think we're missing your question, though, because what Jessica was saying was that the water that you're using in your home is from the city. It's a municipal water system, and it's piped in. And your question was, what's the highest level of groundwater?
So there. Yeah, so there is some groundwater contamination, and they've collected different groundwater grab samples from a number of locations between this community and Ford Road and the golf course and Sea Island. And from there, the next step is to place monitoring wells to see what the concentrations are, how they're behaving. Are they decreasing? Are they increasing? We need a complete picture to know the next steps when it comes to, is it cleanup? It is.
We have groundwater reports, and actually Heidi here has a printout of the report with the numbers. One of the things to know about groundwater, I know Jessica said shallow, but for a geologist, shallow means something different than maybe a non-geologist person. So the groundwater we encounter here is about 60, 65, or even deeper. So when we
Is that
analyze
feet? 65 feet?
below the ground. So when we talk about impacted groundwater, that groundwater is not going to your drinking water, and it's unlikely that you're going to come into contact with it through any sort of daily activity, because it's not really reachable or accessible. You're not going to touch it. You're not going to enter a pond with it. It's very far below ground.
But apparently I have. So that's why I'm asking about the numbers, so I can track that.
So a couple things.
Yeah.
We'll get your name and number, and we can send you the reports. And I would just say, because we have a lot of folks here, if you have something specific that's a concern specific to you, we will remain after the meeting and happy to talk with each of you about your homes, levels in your homes, or any specific health concerns that you might have. We usually have a toxicologist from the OEHA, which is the Office of Environmental Health and Environmental Hazard Assessment.
Health hazard assessment.
Health and Hazard Assessment. She isn't here tonight, but we're happy to put you in touch with somebody. And that goes for everybody here. Does that work? Okay. All right. And I'll.
Okay, so then for the next slide, so just so everyone is, I'm hoping on the same slide, we're slide 8. So now we're at the proposed remedial action objectives, and that would be the cleanup goals for the cleanup activities, and to just address, it addresses each impacted media. So that would be groundwater. It looks at soil, it looks at soil gas, and it looks at indoor air, and it sets cleanup objectives for that. So sometimes the cleanup goals can be a numerical value. If it's indoor air, for example, there is a set screening level that it's set at a certain acceptable risk level that we want to continue to use. So we'll use that as a numerical value. But a lot of times, if you don't have direct contact, like that shallow groundwater or deeper soil gas, that can be more of a descriptive criteria. And it does, though, have to be protective of human health and the environment. So the first one would be groundwater. And the remedial action objective for that is to have full delineation of the groundwater plume and have decreasing concentrations. And that the contaminated groundwater would reach drinking water standards in a reasonable time frame. And with those goals, that's how you also determine what your planned remedy is going to be. How are you going to achieve those goals? And so the Water Board, we concurred with that remedial action objective. The next one was for soil. We don't anticipate any contaminated soil over here because this is not the former facility, it's off-site, but regardless, we insisted on still having cleanup objectives for soil, and that would be the environmental screening levels for shallow soil because it takes into account direct contact, and that's what's important for us. So that's, they already have all the protective assumption built in, so the ESLs were proposed for that, and we concurred. Next is soil gas, and Ford and Wood proposed site-specific screening levels. And we generally concur with that, but one of the comments that we made to that was for homes in the Belcourt Hill community, they have what's called subslab pins. So it's a soil gas sample collected directly beneath the foundation of the building. And there's that data too, and that wasn't incorporated into the cleanup objectives, and we asked that it be considered as well. And then finally is the indoor air, and again, they're using the environmental screening levels. The risk has already been calculated into it, and so we concurred with that recommendation. So the feasibility study evaluated remedial technologies based on the following criteria. There needs to be the ability to implement the remedial technology. That technology needs to be effective. It looks at the effectiveness. And then finally, cost. And for soil gas and indoor air, 6 remedial technologies were evaluated for cleanup, and of those 6, 3 were retained as feasible for implementation. So on slide 10, you'll see. Oh yeah. We're still waiting. But if you can hear me in the back and that plane isn't, you can hear me fine? Okay. So the remedial alternatives that were proposed, again, a remedial alternative, it's one or more remedial technologies that's proposed to meet those remedial action objectives. And the remedial alternatives that were proposed in the draft feasibility study include one, alternative one was no action. And I want to point out that all feasibility studies have a remedial alternative of no action. It's for comparative purposes. Alternative 2 was soil vapor extraction and indoor air monitoring. And then alternatives 3 and 4 were subslab depressurization and indoor air monitoring, and they were going to be dependent on vapor intrusion occurring. There was a lot of similarities, so in our comment on the draft feasibility study, we did ask that Ford combine both alternatives 3 and 4. So the remedial alternatives, on the next slide, you'll see what's called the National Contingency Plan's 9 evaluation criteria. And that it is categorized into 3 groups. We have the threshold criteria, the primary balancing criteria, and the modifying criteria. And for looking at the remedial alternatives, all of the threshold criteria must be met. So they have to be protective of human health and the environment, and it must comply with state and federal requirements. And a lot of times this is where alternative 1 gets thrown out. Then Next is that primary balancing criteria, and that's what kind of weighs all of the technologies, what they use to weigh the different technologies against each other. So they're looking at the long-term effectiveness and permanence, the reduction of toxicity and mobility and volume through treatment. There is short-term effectiveness, the implementability, as well as cost. And then finally is the modifying criteria, and that addresses both regulatory and community acceptance. And the community acceptance is especially important and valuable to the water board. And it is mentioned in our statutes regarding cleanup. So the next slide shows which one was recommended. And so based on that evaluation criteria, alternative 4 was recommended within that draft feasibility study, and what we're gonna present to you tonight. So alternative 4 includes indoor air monitoring, because most of what we were seeing was future risk. So this makes sure nothing changes over time. And if something does change, if a home ends up, homes naturally, the foundations get cracks in the foundation, and that can increase vapor intrusion. Sometimes home remodeling, like changing the HVAC system, creating more pressure or negative pressure in the building, can bring in more vapor intrusion. So we want to look at this over time. It's not anticipated, but we don't like assumptions. Assumptions aren't always correct. So we want the analytical data to support it. That's why the indoor air monitoring component is so important. And then the other one was proposing the subslab depressurization if vapor intrusion is occurring. And that subslab depressurization creates a negative pressure beneath the foundation, and it allows, it basically redirects those vapors that were sitting, in a sense, underneath the foundation. It redirects it to above the roof line. And that addresses the vapor intrusion. And then,
And I'm going to give you this microphone. We want you to sing. You got to sing your question.
Okay, thank you. So regarding the indoor air monitoring, you'd mentioned it's very important, but my property and no other properties that I'm familiar with have had the indoor air monitoring. I know there are very, very few. Why isn't each unit being tested?
that's a great question. So we have a lot of soil gas probes. So we're looking below the ground and looking for that soil gas contamination. If the home is located where there is the soil vapor plume, that contaminated soil gas, those homes are included in the indoor air investigation area. Homes that are outside of that have soil gas data, or lack, I should say, soil gas data that is below those screening levels, meaning soil gas is not high enough that it can get into indoor air. And we have sampling data for the last 3+ years that is supporting the screening levels that we initially used to make sure it's protective. And I know in some of the areas we also have a lot of soil gas probes that are having no detections as well. And after the meeting, I know we have a lot of the data, and we can talk more on it too.
Yeah, we have a figure up on the poster in the back, and it's easiest to kind of stand up there and have me explain, but I can kind of walk you through what the soil gas shows, and we can point to your house and say why, it doesn't warrant indoor air sampling because it's not near any of that area of impact.
But I'll also say, if your home is in an area and to be sampled, and maybe you're new to the area, or you just chose earlier not to participate, but now you want to, we're always taking, if a home falls within the indoor air investigation area, we will still monitor those homes.
If we just, thank you. If we want to request indoor air sampling of our particular unit, even though it doesn't fall within the parameters that you now have established, may we request that?
No, because what happens is there needs to be contaminated soil gas in order for there to be vapor intrusion. And what we are seeing is there's a lot of contaminants in indoor air we have seen it in candles, hobby glue, dry cleaning, gun cleaner, building materials. I mean, there is so many things, and it's shocking of, all of the, between homes that we've sampled just in this community, but then in addition, all the other projects that we oversee that we're doing the vapor intrusion evaluations on, the amount of background interference. So that's why, is because if there's anything, it would be an indoor air source, because if it's not below the ground, below your home, then it won't come into your home. There's nothing to get into the home. And another thing that has been looked at is sewer gas. Is there any chance that the soil gas plume has seeped into the sewer lines and getting into homes that way? Because that is a potential. It's not likely given this scenario here, but it was a question that remained. And so the water board had asked Ford to do this sampling, and they had done it a couple of times. They've done it out here, and they've done it in a few other areas where we had indoor air results that didn't quite match what we were seeing below the ground. And so we wanted to make sure we had enough lines of evidence to support that conclusions that were being made are protective of human health. It is or is not vapor intrusion. And we're getting the correct answers, not just assumed answers. And then for the proposed remedy, the water board had a couple comments that we wanted to see addressed. Was one, with this kind of more hands-off approach, we want to see an estimate for what's the estimated time frame for that soil vapor plume to reduce and meet those remedial action objectives, those cleanup goals. The other one was we wanted to see considerations. If soil gas concentrations are increasing, what is the plan then? So we wanted to look at, we wanted a couple things to be addressed in that final feasibility study. And then, oh yeah. Tracy's behind a post, so I don't know if there's a question. Okay. So then I just included on slide 14, it is just a figure that shows all of the soil vapor monitoring points. You'll notice in this community, there's hardly anything in the northwest portion, and that's because from the data that was collected in the One Ford Road community and data collected here with these existing probes, there is nothing up there. And we've got several data points to support that continue to be monitored. So I just wanted to throw that in. Other communities have had to, in their draft feasibility study, have had to propose a couple additional monitoring points, soil vapor monitoring points and stuff. And here, there's a really good amount of data points, and so there's no need for anything extra. So then that brings us to the public comment period. And that just allows the opportunity for public input. We want to hear what you have to say. And then the finalized feasibility study is due to us 45 days following the conclusion of the public comment period. And so that public comment period goes from forgetting advanced slides, I'm sorry. The public comment period, it's on slide 16. It has all my contact info, but it goes from July 18th through August 16th, and we will be taking comments for the public comment period tonight during the last 15 minutes of the Q&A session. And you can also, once you go home tonight, as you're thinking on it, looking at this presentation, maybe you look up the our response letter, or you are savvy and you take a look at this very large document, and you have questions or comments, You can email me, or you can send it in writing to the address that is on this slide. And we will be taking that through August 16th. You can also call. My phone number's not on here, but it's on the community fact sheet. So, and I know you guys have that handout, so you can reach out that way as well.
Jessica, can you explain what you do with public comments, how they're
Oh, yes.
considered?
Yeah,
Please?
yep.
Thank you.
So when, once we receive all the public comments, then we'll prepare a responsiveness summary. So we're going to respond to your comment. We'll prepare a document. It'll be included in that final feasibility study on how we addressed your comment. And we will also send a copy of that responsiveness summary to you.
Jessica, are you storing this stuff online? It can be accessed?
Yes. So,
Get that address from you later?
yes. Yep.
It's on there too. I'll show you. Yes. So the question was, are you storing this information online? There's several online resources. They're all in this packet. There's the Water Board's website. Ford also maintains a website that might be a little bit easier to navigate.
It
No,
prob- it
no
probably-
offense.
I know. The state database has all the reports, so it's got everything, and it can be a bear to review, or to find sometimes. But I have been known to, when I get an email from somebody looking for a specific report, I pull it up and I send them a link to the PDF so they can just click
That
it.
is definitely the easiest option.
So-
Contact one of us and we'll
Yeah.
get you what you're looking for. And you have a question in the back. So before you go further, let
Mm-hmm.
me do that. I'm going to, once again, we're live streaming. So why don't you-
Okay, thank you. I just had a question. I think it's slide 14, the soil gas monitoring locations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, can you explain, like, if you're in an area of one of these, would you have been made aware of that? And how do you tell from the little squares on here? Some are orange, some are pink. But I don't know what that. There's no code that says what these things mean. Is
Oh,
it
yeah.
somewhere else?
Yeah, we have it.
It's just up
It's
on
on
that.
these figures back there, and we can. Early on in our public meetings, we used to really include a lot more detail of those figures, and it was too much information to be presented on a slide. It wasn't coming across well, and we found that if we had the poster boards in the back and we could talk and point to like a specific number, it was a lot easier to explain. And so, I mean, if you guys are all interested in a specific area and have a common question, we'll take the mics back just so you can all hear. We're good with that. I just know a lot of time it's easier to point to those.
No, I guess if you are in one of these soil gas monitoring locations, would you have been made? I am new to the area, so I don't know about this. I'm
Yeah.
here to learn.
Yeah. So before Ford does any of the work, and Wood does all the work on behalf of Ford, before they go out there, they send work notices. And I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
probes that are already in the ground, they're in HOA common spaces. So we work closely with the HOA to get approval and install them. So all the things you see on the figure have already been installed. The impact to the resident for the duration of installation's already passed. So you wouldn't necessarily get notified, oh, you're in an area near a soil gas probe. We sample those probes 2 to 3 times a year. The sampling process, there's like a van, there's a whole chemistry lab inside of it. We pull a sample from the ground, we analyze it right there, and then we report on it. And the data that you see in the figure is based on the sampling that we do 3 times a year, 2 to 3 times a year. So if you are a resident, it kind of goes, if you were just near a soil gas probe, that work kind of goes along in the background. We have the information like these meetings, and we have it publicly available, and we can get you more information if you're interested. Where we really talk to residents one-on-one and inform them about this process is if they're in the indoor air investigation area. And that's where we are looking to do indoor air sampling within your home. Like we mentioned before, only a small subset of homes are offered that because there's only a small subset of homes within Belcourt Hill and Sea Island that are underlain by impacted soil vapors above a certain concentration that warrant sampling. So if you're not in that area and you haven't received an indoor air testing request letter, then The soil gas sampling probably goes along without much disturbance to your day-to-day life. We keep monitoring it. We make sure that there's no changes, that concentrations are decreasing, things like that. And only if there would be an issue would we sort of bring it up to the community. Does that make sense?
One more question.
I'm just curious about the sub-slab investigations, and because our units are pretty much above ground, they're built to ground. There is a little bit of cement underneath. Is that where you go underneath there?
Yeah, so for Belcourt Hill, the properties are obviously built on a slope, and so that's kind of a unique construction. So the way we do the sub-slab sampling, we kind of do a couple of things. At street level, which is where the garages are, that's where we install the sub-slab pin. That's to try to capture what may be beneath the slab. What may be beneath the slab, kind of at that, I would say, entry level area of your home. What we also do, most of the homes have a crawl space. So it's that space below the home, kind of on the downhill side. We also take a sample from in the crawl space. And that is to make sure that, there's kind of a grade difference, right? We're checking the street level, but we're also checking kind of the downhill slope level. And that helps us evaluate the indoor air as well.
Okay. So on slide 17, the next steps following the public comment period would be to finalize that feasibility study and prepare the responsive summary for any public comments that we receive. Once that is finalized, we'll submit it to the water board. We will review it, hopefully give it our final approval. And then from there, we would request a remedial action plan, and that would include the work plan and any kind of designs that are necessary to implement the proposed remedy. And then that would get submitted to the water board for approval. We would get our review, provide any comments, our approval on it, and then next would go into the permitting phase to collect any necessary permits. If subslab depressurization is a planned course, they would conduct a pilot study to make sure it is designed correctly. I don't know if that would be proposed initially in that remedial action plan. Since it's still draft and we're looking at the needs for it here to be determined, but that's something that has the potential to be included in that remedial action plan. And then it's the long-term indoor air monitoring. And so for the additional information, I know we have our geo-tracker, which is the state's database. The fact sheet that is included in your handout has the link. Then there is the LIRIS list, which is the water board's email notification subscription. So we typically use that to let people know of the community-wide meetings. Because we can't distinguish between who's on that list, we aren't sending it for these smaller community-specific meetings, but it is for the community-wide ones. Then there is the water board on the Santa Ana Water Board internet site. There is a web page for the Farmer Ford Aeronutronics facility. That's where we have typically a lot of more the just public participation information. So the community fact sheets and links to GeoTracker to pull those up. And then Ford does have their site-specific website, and it really pertains to the vapor intrusion investigation part. So it is more manageable than the GeoTracker website, but if there's things outside of the vapor intrusion assessment, it is on the GeoTracker database there. And then all of the reports are being sent to the library. So there's a local information repository for folks that want to look at a hard copy of the document versus looking at it online. And so with that,
Okay.
questions.
So we have questions and answers, and just the way that we'd like to do this is if you have clarifying questions or just questions, please take this opportunity to ask that, and then we'll stop and we'll actually go into the public comment because I'm going to make sure that we get those. So we're going to divide it two ways. If you don't want to wait and you want to give us a public comment now, just make it clear. This is my comment, and I'd like it recorded and answered in the response to comments. So is that clear as mud to everybody? All right, questions? Anybody?
Tracy.
Thank you. Wasn't looking in this corner.
Okay, I don't know when the study began. When was that?
So
What year?
it was 2018, but there was an evaluation in Sea Island community back in 2012. And the area that was evaluated, I believe all the results were non-detect or just barely above the laboratory reporting limits, and it didn't warrant any additional.
So
But-
for Belcourt Hill,
That
the
started
first
2000.
study was done in 2018.
Yeah. Yes.
And then you're getting all these results. So, how are we doing? When will we have some kind of conclusion or some kind of definite? I mean, all we're hearing now is study, figure. When will we have some results that are meaningful and conclusions? And are we safe? Do we need to sell our house? I mean,
So
tell us what
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do.
yeah.
And that's another question. If we need to sell our property, do we have to refer everything? I mean,
if you want to move, so be it. But this is beautiful. I would not move from the data that's been collected. We have collected a lot, and some of the conclusions that have been drawn. One of them was that human health risk assessment. So they took that data and they evaluated the risk, both what is current and that being looking at your indoor air concentrations, and then future risk. So they looked at the soil gas concentrations and calculated risk based on those numbers. And
yes, excuse me, I understand all that. But when can we expect to know the real danger, if there is danger?
So that's what was in that risk assessment. That addresses that danger. So is there an immediate risk to your health from what's going on here? The answer simply, no. We found some that are in this really low range concentrations that aren't high enough that it warrants that active remediation or air purifiers. There's no air purifiers in either this community or in either Belcourt Hill or Sea Island because there is not vapor intrusion occurring at high enough concentrations for that. I think Daniela has something to add.
Yeah, I was going to say, just in very simple terms, that human health risk assessment evaluated the current and future risk. The current risk, there's not really any risk. The reason there's still a potential for future risk is because we do still, in a small kind of vein of area, see some elevated soil gas concentrations. That is gives the potential for them to come into a home because they exist in the ground. And this feasibility study that Jessica was talking about, that's part of this timeline of getting to your answer, like when are we done? Right now, we are addressing the potential. The feasibility study is addressing how do we manage this potential future risk. So it's not a super urgent risk to human health at this moment, but there still is that potential. What we want to do is make sure that soil gas that's still there doesn't get anywhere, doesn't get into homes, and that it either dissipates naturally or we remove it through technology.
Okay, so there are a lot of sales. Not here, but I mean all over the area. Do the buyers call you?
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
put their
Yeah.
their fears,
I answer any questions truthfully, and what we have seen occur, I've seen it two sides. I've seen folks move in and not know the home's been sampled my understanding, I'm a geologist, I'm not an attorney or anything like that, but my understanding is that that's supposed to be disclosed. But we have also had the majority disclose it, and homes that are on the market getting calls, whether they're calling that Ford information hotline and Danielle is answering it, or they're calling me and they've already spoken to some, her, and then they want to get that confirmation from me, or vice versa. We answer calls and those questions. And a lot of times they have the indoor air results and they say, what does this mean? And we walk through it. And I will have a 30-minute conversation. Anyone who's called me will know I will talk until you understand. I want to make sure you understand what we're doing, because it is technical. It is your livelihood. And I understand that and can appreciate that. And I know if, when you don't understand something, it makes it very terrifying. And we recognize that. And that's why we keep coming out and stuff. And so with any of those questions, if it's home selling and you're trying to interpret that data, call one of us and we will sit on the phone and help you as much as we can.
Okay. Other questions? Wait, let me walk this over. I think it's you.
You mentioned, I don't remember the exact words you used, but you mentioned like it's below risk or it's above risk. So where do you get those baselines?
So the baselines come from, we look at the toxicity of a chemical, the exposure route, how are you being exposed to it, and then the kind of protective number. And that number for cancer risk is a increased risk of a 1 in a million chance. So if you've been exposed to this chemical for 26 years, and this is developed by the EPA. If you've been
EPA.
Yeah, the US EPA comes up, and that's kind of their formula. It has to do with how toxic is the chemical. Are we looking at cancer risk? Are we looking at non-cancer health effects? Some chemicals only have non-cancer health effects, so you can be exposed to a much higher quantity amount. They're less toxic, and they look at They look at lifetime exposure as well. And that's where those numbers come from. And the indoor air screening levels tend to come from the US EPA.
US EPA?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where the environmental screening levels pull a lot of their resources. They're developed by research scientists, but they are pulling that information from the existing resources and doing their evaluation, looking at the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the US EPA.
You're not making up the numbers, they're coming from.
No, we definitely are not making up those numbers.
From the state.
Yeah.
Okay, it is, we just have a few more minutes, so I'm going to open this up for public comment. And and you can make it a public comment if you want, or just clarify it's not. I just want to make sure that we have time. I also want to say we'll stay after and talk about anybody's specific situation as long as you like.
Yeah, I guess this can be a public comment, but I'm looking at the various maps, one of the feasibility study and the other one of the area that's affected, and showing the former facility and all of that. I guess this is kind of a comment towards the future risk, because it looks like the facility was on this side of Ford Road, but when you look at the soil areas that are being evaluated, they all are that way. They're all downhill. So does this mean that this is something that's mitigating in this direction? When you say that there's still something under there, is that, as a geologist, maybe you can, I don't know geology to know this, but if it started up here and it seems to be going this way, is that where the future risk could be?
So that's a great question. It's a couple components. That's why the longer term monitoring of the soil gas plume is important. We want to know, is that soil gas plume staying right here and not going? Is it traveling because it can move? Or is it shrinking, or is it expanding? And these are all questions that we want answered, and why it takes a couple years worth of collecting data before we even ask for a cleanup plan, because those factors are taken into consideration.
And
Okay.
just to add to that, you're correct that groundwater from the former facility footprint does kind of travel in this southwest direction, and that's sort of why you see us. We are sampling all around, but where we find the impacts is following that groundwater pathway.
And I will say, at least at our office for the state, which is in Riverside, we have an old light table, and I have taken the 1940s, before this area was developed, aerial photographs and laid it on top of the current photos and drawn out the buried arroyos, because there was old canyons, how, looking at that as potential ways for contamination from, up the high point was the former facility. And what areas is it possible that it left the site? And these things have all been taken into consideration over the last 4+ years that we've been doing this recent investigation.
Okay, other public comments? I'm going to have you state your name if you would too.
I'm Linda. Danielle, you mentioned a few minutes ago there's a particular area that is more concentrated. Is that marked on the map?
Yeah, if you want to stand, once this is concluded, we'll go up and stand by that poster, and I'll show you the green area that marks that.
Okay, other questions, comments? Okay, we have a community meeting tomorrow night. If you didn't get enough tonight, we have a community meeting tomorrow night.
And I will say, at least the community meeting tomorrow night does go through a little bit more of the site history, because this is an it's an old in case with the water board. Mm-hmm. So it's been going on for quite some time. So there's a lot of, I'm going to give a very quick snapshot of the history, but history nonetheless. And we'll be talking more of the project as a whole. So it's a good overview. It's also being live streamed, so you can watch it online tomorrow night.
You can also meet some of your neighbors, some of the other neighbors. So if you'd like to come, it's at the
Civic Center.
6:30. 6:30, and again, we'll all be there, and we'll stay afterwards to answer any questions. So I'd like to first of all thank everybody for attending tonight. We will stay here as long as you want. If you have a site-specific question or concern, we have the maps over here. We're happy to look at your property or answer any other questions. And I think that's all. Thank you so much for your time.